you're in dire need of an upgrade. Systemic, top to bottom. 100-point restoration, that's why I'm here.
How do you invoice someone? How do you put together an invoice, and what does that invoice need to have on it? You spent the time and the effort doing the work, so it'd be pretty good to get paid, right? And you want to get paid much sooner rather than later. I personally haven't had any problems with this while self-employed, but the data out there suggests that millions of hours get wasted every year in chasing invoices, and that it's quite common to have outstanding invoices where you're owed money. Now, these aren't reasons to not start a side hustle or business, but there are definitely ways to make the process easier, to make it more likely that you'll get paid and on time. I also want to suggest some ways that you could earn money and maybe skip invoicing altogether. Now, the first invoice I ever had to do, I just typed from Google Images into a Word doc. So I looked at what invoices tend to look like and kind of worked out from comparing other invoices. I think I was probably also dealing with invoices incoming at work. So I kind of worked out from there what most invoices should have on them to qualify as an invoice that you'll actually get paid. If you prefer using Excel for anything, it's possible to create a template in Excel too. Just generally creating templates for yourself in a side hustle or business of any documents that you use over and over again. It's good to have something like that you can just use as your sort of blank slate if there's things that you do over and over, or there are ready-made alternatives out there. So I'll try and put a link so that if you need someone else to give you a template, if you really don't know where to start, you'll be able to refer to that instead. An invoice will usually include the date, reference number. So again, for the very first invoice I ever sent, I think I really went out there and I put invoice number 1 or something like that. You want to put on there the service or the product that you're selling and the date that you supplied that, your rate and the total. If you're VAT registered, you'd put VAT on there. If it's your very first time selling anything, you're probably not doing the kind of revenue where you're VAT registered, but I'll link to the gov.uk checklist so that you can see what the government advises you do include on an invoice, and you can also follow the links there about whether you need to think about VAT or not. You'd also put on there your contact details, so a business correspondence address, a business name if you have one, and also the contact details of the person who needs to pay so that it's clear who you're invoicing or which business you're invoicing. And it should also normally say how to pay you. So for instance, bank account details if you're expecting a backed payment, or any payment methods that you don't accept, like checks for instance. Currency can be an important thing to put on there if you're working with international customers. You can also put on there late payment penalties. So if someone isn't going to pay you on time, it might say on the invoice that you charge them a certain percentage of the original invoice. And it's also common to put on there net terms. So again, the gov.uk website will have the latest information about what you can, what's enforceable basically. If you don't put any net terms on there, then it's silent payment terms. So basically the other person can assume that they've got 30 days to pay you. Most of us wouldn't have the time or the resources to change payments really often. So like if you do have the time to chase someone after only 7 days, I wonder if you'd be better off sending like automatic email reminders instead and using that time to complete more projects, because otherwise any job that you do is going to be costing you more than you initially thought if you're not counting the hours that you spend chasing payment as well. So Xero have data suggesting that the shorter the payment term, the quicker the people that use their bookkeeping software do get paid. So for instance, their data shows that when you put 7 days on your invoice as the time frame in which you expect to get paid, you're most likely to get paid after 2 weeks. If you put 2 weeks, you can generally expect to get paid after 3 weeks. If you put 21 days, are you seeing a pattern forming here? It's quite likely you'll get paid after around 28 days, and so on. And so it's not a bad idea to put short payment terms on an invoice of, say, 7 days. It does seem to spur the other person on to pay you quicker. But you also might not have the time and the resources, if they don't pay you very quickly, to actually chase that up. And it's, as far as like legal recourse, which most of us, again, don't have the time, the resources to be suing someone after a couple of days when they haven't paid you. 30 days is kind of a good rule of thumb. You can also check your bank account for invoicing capabilities. Now, not everyone decides that they even need a business bank account depending on how much they're selling. You can get a business bank account for free. I think they're a really good idea for keeping income and outgoings separate from anything else that you do, even if you're not doing a great amount of money with a side hustle. And from a tax point of view, again, don't panic. Like, if you're like, wait, I haven't thought about the tax implications either, it's okay. We can tackle that in another episode if you like. I think someone has submitted a question actually about what to do about tax. But if you do need to make a declaration for tax, having a separate bank account for your business income, even if it's a very small side hustle, just will probably make life a lot easier for you. And like I said, you can get business bank accounts for free, and some of those might have a feature for you where they'll help you to generate invoices, and some of them come with free bookkeeping software that allow you to generate invoices very easily. Now again, bookkeeping software is something where you might think, oh gosh, this is another thing that I need. I just wanted to sell a few things on eBay a couple of times a month, or I just wanted to sell crafts on Etsy or whatever it is. So this is meant to make your life easier rather than harder, and there is some free bookkeeping software available, so it doesn't have to be an extra expense either. You might feel that you aren't going to have enough sort of going in and out at huge volumes that you're going to have difficulty tracking it in the slightest. But basically, bookkeeping software does usually help you month to month keep track of your expenses and your income within a side hustle or business. Now, someone suggested Wave to me, but the person who suggested it is Canadian. So anytime you get a recommendation for something, it's great that we have an international community online. It's great that we can look things up on YouTube and whatnot, and in podcasts. But do double check that any recommendation is relevant for your locale. They were using it to invoice coaching clients and then collecting signatures on their contracts with DocuSign. So that's a way to get signatures digitally. Just because you're sending an invoice doesn't necessarily mean that you're dealing in long contracts that require a signature as well. So don't worry about that if it's not applicable to you. If you're not sure if it's applicable to you, give me a shout, and I'll talk about when you might want contracts in place. Just check the limitations of any software based on your needs, basically. The world is really your oyster online, so I don't see why anyone shouldn't be thinking about catering to an international audience, unless it's because you're offering something that's very hyper niche for something local to you. Again, that's something I can talk about in another episode if you want to talk about niches and sort of targeting a product or service. Someone was talking to me about how they couldn't get their first client and they were building websites in their local town in South Africa. And I was like, dude being, a perfectly acceptable technical way to refer to someone in a professional setting. I said, dude, we're having this conversation thousands of miles apart, and you're building websites on the internet. Why don't you market yourself online to anyone in the world and build websites for someone no matter where they are? Because you could do that. So you don't have to limit yourself, but there is a consideration there, which is to do with, I mentioned you might want to put on an invoice what currency you're expecting payment. So, and if you are going to use bookkeeping software, just something to be aware of. If it is going to be a common thing that you're going to be invoicing in different currencies or a different currency to your currency. Last time I checked, QuickBooks for the self-employed, I don't think they were handling multiple currencies. Xero, I think it's pronounced Xero, right? It's spelled Xero. I'll put a link in the show notes. Xero can only, how else would you pronounce it? Anyway, they can only change the currency, or you can only change the currency on an invoice with them, I think, if you're paying for their highest tier. In a previous episode, I talked about tiered pricing when you're either selling products and services or paying for services within a side hustle or business. So I can link to that too if you need some help kind of evaluating that. You can use it to your advantage for sure. Free Agent, I believe, does let you handle different currencies, and that's available for free with certain business accounts. If you're a content creator in particular, relying on affiliate income, a lot of affiliate programs are based in the US and only deal in dollars. So that's something to consider. I guess if you deal in sponsorship too, if you're a content creator, you might be invoicing to get paid for that. So basically I would just check before you sign up to anything whether that bookkeeping software is going to do what you need it to do. And I'll try and link to an invoice template. If you want me to create templates for anything, by the way, that you think would be helpful, just let me know. I'll see what I can do. If you want printables for something, it would probably be for the mailing list only. That only seems fair. I make notebooks on Amazon for funsies, and I've always said if anyone wants like a custom interior, not for invoicing, I don't think it would be like a little invoice book because that's usually all done mainly electronically. It would probably be for like goal tracking or income tracking if you don't have a huge amount of income and outgoings to keep track of. There is one other way to try and speed up payments when you're invoicing, and that is if you do offer some kind of discount for early payment or paying upfront. And if you're worried about sort of underselling, then it just means that you would kind of like bump up your prices in the first place, so that whatever you charge for that early payment or upfront payment is sort of what you want to be charging anyway. And that can also act as like a form of anchoring. If you have a higher price for late payers or anyone who wants to pay in installments, that usually acts as an anchor where customers kind of want to go the route that's going to cost them less anyway, and it just makes everyone's life easier. I definitely consider a route where you deal with invoices as little as possible anyway. So anything where you could have like an online shop front and take payment up front instead. So if your service is that you're a freelancer who makes deliverables, could you create a template pack that people pay for instantly and download instead? Especially if you're providing the same service over and over again, and if the actual work that you're doing doesn't change that much from sort of business to business or person to person. If there's a way to make it one size fits all, then there's opportunities there to make that a bit more passive and focus on selling that rather than having to complete individual projects. Freelance writers can sell packages of work that's paid for upfront. So if you said you were going to deliver a certain number of words over the next 3 or 6 months, as opposed to just writing one piece, or that you're going to deliver all the writing that they want within the next month, but with the idea that they're paying so that they've got the content that they can drip feed after that. out over a time frame that they want of many months. Even if you're like a graphic designer who does custom designs, you could sort of turn that into a packaged product where you have some fixed prices and you get a set amount of assets in return for that. So maybe it's like you get a poster design, a flyer design, and a logo of some sort. And the only variable is that you're making, a pretty logo relevant to each customer within a set time frame after they've paid. But they pay up front and they sort of know, with as little back and forth as possible, what the fixed items are that they're getting in return for that. You can still have pricing tiers with something like that too. Maybe not right away, but you can have tiers where the customer either pays for like the entire kit and caboodle, or they're just paying for a couple of elements. If you're a person-to-person service provider, you can turn that into packages also. So like if you provide coaching, consulting, training, those are things that can be turned into memberships that are paid for upfront with like an annual fee or a quarterly fee. There's a whole other world there to do with administrating if you go down the route of monthly payments. So I wouldn't swap invoicing for a monthly payment plan headache if you're going to try and set up a subscription business today or tomorrow. Because the common wisdom is that, yes, you might attract more people if you let them pay little and often, but it also eats into your profit anyway, because customers who pay little and often are more likely to miss payments altogether, and that can put you back to square one. There's also a whole debate to be had about the quality of the customer. It just comes down to psychology and the difference in behavior when we're invested in something. If we've paid once with a large fee attached, we kind of treat that differently than we do if we've just paid like a small monthly cost for something. But basically, every time you have to send a single invoice, there's a huge opportunity cost, because that's one and done. You've got to then look for more work or convince that client to buy another project from you. So that's where anything with like a subscription element or an ongoing package can really help with retention and mean that you're not sort of constantly either seeking out new clients or trying to resell to people who've bought from you before. And on the training side, I think courses with a one-time payment through a course platform are another option, but they're probably not best for someone just starting out who's never offered services one-on-one or successfully sold a product before. I think lots of people think that they're the first way to make money online, and there's lots of information out there about passive income online that would try and get you to go straight into selling courses and convince you that it's 100% passive. And I don't think that's really true, and I think there's probably some other things that have to come first. I mentioned Clarity.fm in previous episode regards offering flexible coaching, consulting, or anything where you're being paid to answer questions, basically. That's a service where you can do it quite ad hoc and there's no invoices required, because the client, they pay with their credit card details. They would put that into Clarity. They're paying for, say, an hour up front. But because Clarity has their credit card, if you go overtime, it just sort of automatically bills them the extra per minute, basically. And for you to get that payment, you don't have to invoice Clarity. You just request payment into your account to PayPal. Or that's how it works at the moment. Obviously, it's always worth checking to see if the process has changed a bit. Some things get better, some things go away. The big trade-off with course platforms or membership platforms is that if you're putting in a system in place like that, that usually comes with its own fees. But they are also a way to retain any business you generate or automate that a bit better. So I think the calculation to do is, what does it cost you every time to chase an invoice? Or what does it cost you every time you don't get paid? So what does it cost you in time? But also, have you run into financial consequences in the past, like falling back onto credit card debt or overdraft charges every time you don't get paid? And I would weigh that up with paying to use a service or a platform that might actually make collecting income easier, especially if you have that money up front and you know that you've got a bit more of a consistent income that you can rely on. Definitely with things like subscriptions for freelancers, that recurring income can give them a bit of peace of mind if they know they've got a handful of people who pay the same every month for the service that you provide. But it also removes a lot of the hassle associated with invoicing. Now, like I said, don't let it put you off starting. Everything new that we do has its challenges. How big the challenge is really just down to our mindset. And there are lots of things out there that will make it easier for you. I think more than ever, brands and platforms, they are trying to make life easier because they really, their business depends on you succeeding. And when I started my blog and the podcast, I was really just amazed at how much things have changed even in the last few years, and how sort of low the barrier to entry is getting to if you want to put out content and things like that. With each service that I sign up for, I'm always like, wow, they're making this really frictionless, and so it should be. And there's lots of services out there that can make your life easier if you're trying to do something new. If you're already paying for certain services as well, so if you already have a business or side hustle that collects email addresses, for instance, so that you can communicate with a mailing list of customers, if you're already making that payment, I'd have a look at if they can help you in this area in terms of delivering services without having to be sending out these individual invoices and having to sort of chase custom all the time on an individual basis. So for instance, I use ConvertKit as my email service provider, and they've been testing out ConvertKit Commerce. That should get rolled out to the UK in future, hopefully not too far away. Obviously, if you're listening to this in the future, this might be a very established thing. But they just started it in the US, and it's a way for their users to deliver digital products in an integrated way, especially if that product would usually be delivered by email anyway. Like if it's some kind of like ebook or templates, like I mentioned, any kind of graphics, something like that. Otherwise, you might be paying for an email service provider, and then maybe you're using a separate website on top of that to try and actually deliver what you're offering. You might be paying all of these separate fees. ConvertKit Commerce's fees so far look very competitive. Given the choice between that and things like Gumroad, I think in future it's going to be a no-brainer for anyone who's already using ConvertKit. It might also challenge things like Patreon. So Patreon, their big selling point, I think, has always been that you only pay fees to Patreon if you're getting paid. So if you don't sell anything in a month, you don't owe Patreon anything. Whereas some other services would charge you monthly to use them, regardless of whether you actually make any sales. And this is really off-putting, right? But again, if you were using Patreon and ConvertKit or another email service provider, and you're paying to use one of those things already, it kind of makes sense that you would just stay in-house instead of adding all of these extra accounts that you have to manage, and just try and do everything in an integrated way in one place. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to know more about ConvertKit anyhow. But finally, the other way to look at this is if you really can't see a way to work without invoices and you're in profit, you could hire a virtual assistant to send out your invoices and chase payments for you, even if they only work a few hours a month doing that. So if paying them makes a significant difference to what you get paid when you're able to collect payments, then do that. That can also be useful for difficult conversations because it provides a buffer between you as the professional and whoever owes you money, so that if you do need to work with them again in future, there's no animosity in the meantime if you need to remind them to pay. There's one last thing. So I have an ebook available to email subscribers on my blog, and in that I talk about upper limit problems. I'll also link to the book that introduced the idea of upper limit problems to the world, because I think you'll find that useful too. If you have trouble sending invoices in the first place or chasing payment, you might have an upper limit problem. So you're afraid to earn money because it means that life will change or it will add some kind of responsibility for you. Don't be afraid. Just click send. I'm autistic. I love a good routine. But if I can say, don't be afraid of change, just click the button. What's your excuse? Go forth.